The Awakening, a bedtime story for adults. Sarah stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back at her. Dark circles underlined her once vibrant eyes, and her shoulders slumped with the weight of unfulfilled dreams. At 35, she felt like she was sleepwalking through life, stuck in a job she hated and a relationship that had long since lost its spark. As she crawled into bed that night, Sarah whispered a desperate prayer to the universe. "Please," she murmured, "show me how to wake up." Little did she know, her prayer was about to be answered in the most unexpected way. Sarah drifted off to sleep and suddenly found herself in a vivid dream. She was standing at the edge of a dense forest, a winding path disappearing into the shadows before her. The air hummed with possibility, and Sarah felt a pull she couldn't explain. "Welcome, sleepwalker." A deep voice resonated from within the trees. Sarah jumped, her heart racing. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. A tall figure emerged from the shadows. He had kind eyes and an aura of wisdom that immediately put Sarah at ease. "I am the dream guide," he said with a warm smile. "I'm here to help you find your way." Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. "Find my way? I don't understand." The dream guide chuckled. "Of course you don't. Not yet, but you will. You asked to wake up, didn't you?" Sarah nodded hesitantly. "Well," the guide continued, "sometimes to truly wake up, we must first journey through our deepest dreams. Are you ready to begin?" Something stirred within Sarah, a flicker of the passion and curiosity she thought she'd lost long ago. She took a deep breath and nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." The dream guide smiled and gestured towards the path. "Then let us begin. Remember, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." As they walked, the forest came alive around them. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, and the very air seemed to shimmer with magic. The dream guide spoke as they traveled. "Sarah, do you know why you feel so stuck in your waking life?" She shrugged. "I guess I'm just afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of change." The guide nodded sagely. "Ah, fear is a powerful force, isn't it? But tell me, what's the opposite of fear?" "Courage," Sarah ventured. "Close," the guide replied. "But I would argue it's faith. Faith in yourself, faith in the universe, faith that you have the power to shape your own destiny." As he spoke these words, the path before them split into two. One led up a steep, rocky incline, while the other meandered through a peaceful meadow. "Which way should we go?" Sarah asked. The dream guide smiled. "That, my dear, is entirely up to you. Remember, it's not the path that matters, but the choices you make along the way." Sarah considered for a moment, then squared her shoulders and pointed to the steep path. "That way. I think I'm ready for a challenge." "Excellent choice," the guide beamed. "Growth and comfort can never coexist." As they climbed, the path grew increasingly difficult. Sarah's muscles burned, and her breath came in ragged gasps. Just as she was about to give up, they crested the hill, and Sarah gasped at the view before her. A vast landscape stretched out as far as the eye could see, filled with mountains and valleys, rivers and forests. It was beautiful but also overwhelming. "This," the dream guide said softly, "is the landscape of your potential. Every peak represents a goal you could achieve, every valley a challenge you could overcome." Sarah's eyes widened. "But it's so vast. How could I possibly explore it all?" The guide placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do it all at once. Remember, success is not a destination, it's a journey. The key is to keep moving forward, one step at a time. As they continued their journey, Sarah encountered various challenges that mirrored her real-life struggles. She faced her fear of public speaking by addressing a crowd of chattering forest creatures. She overcame her self-doubt by crossing a rickety bridge over a bottomless chasm, trusting that it would hold her weight. With each obstacle she overcame, Sarah felt stronger, more confident. The dream guide was always there, offering words of encouragement and wisdom. Your past does not equal your future, he reminded her as they paused by a babbling brook. Every day is a new opportunity to rewrite your story. As the dream neared its end, Sarah found herself back where she started, at the edge of the forest. But now, she stood tall, her eyes bright with newfound purpose. The dream guide smiled at her transformation. Remember, Sarah, the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions. Always ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can I grow? What's the next step I can take towards my dreams? Sarah nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. The guide's form began to fade, but his voice lingered. The power was within you all along, Sarah. You just needed to awaken to it. Now go, live with passion, and remember, the only limits that exist are the ones in your mind. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, sunlight streaming through her bedroom window. For the first time in years, she felt truly awake. She sat up, grabbed a notebook from her bedside table, and began to write. Today, she wrote, her hand trembling with excitement, is the first day of the rest of my life, and I'm going to make it count. As Sarah closed the notebook, she felt a profound shift within herself. The dream had awakened something long dormant, a sense of possibility, of potential. She realized that her life, just like her dream, was a journey of her own making. With a deep breath, she stood up, ready to face the day and her future with newfound courage and determination. The awakening had begun. Chapter 2. The First Step. Sarah's newfound enthusiasm carried her through her morning routine with an energy she hadn't felt in years. As she prepared for work, she couldn't shake the vivid memory of her dream and the wisdom imparted by the dream guide. The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your questions, she muttered to herself as she buttoned her blouse. Okay then, what's the most important question I need to ask myself right now? She paused, meeting her own gaze in the mirror. What do I really want? The question hung in the air, heavy with possibility and a touch of fear. Sarah had spent so long going through the motions, she realized she hadn't seriously considered what she truly desired in years. As she drove to work, her mind raced with possibilities. By the time she pulled into the parking lot of the marketing firm where she'd worked for the past decade, Sarah had made a decision. It was time for a change. With trembling hands, she knocked on her boss's door. "Come in," called a gruff voice. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped inside. "Mr. Thompson, do you have a moment?" Her boss, a portly man with thinning hair and perpetually furrowed brows, glanced up from his computer. "Make it quick, Sarah. We've got the Johnson presentation in an hour." "That's actually what I wanted to talk about," Sarah began, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I'd like to lead the presentation today." Mr. Thompson's eyebrows shot up. "You? but Mark always handles the big clients. Sarah nodded, feeling a familiar flutter of self-doubt. But then she remembered the dream guide's words, "The only limits that exist are the ones in your mind." "I know," she said, squaring her shoulders. "But I've been working on this account for months. I know the campaign inside and out, and I have some new ideas I think could really wow the client." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with newfound interest. "This is unexpected, Sarah. You've never shown interest in taking the lead before." "I know," Sarah admitted, "but I'm ready now. I'm asking for a chance to prove myself." After a moment of consideration, Mr. Thompson nodded. "All right, Sarah, the presentation's yours. Don't make me regret this." As Sarah left the office, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and terror, she couldn't help but smile. She had taken the first step towards change, and it felt exhilarating. The next hour flew by as Sarah prepared for the presentation, refining her pitch and practicing her delivery. As she stood before the mirror in the office bathroom, giving herself a final pep talk, she remembered another piece of wisdom from her dream. "Your past does not equal your future," she whispered to her reflection. "This is your moment, Sarah. Make it count." The presentation room fell silent as Sarah took her place at the head of the table. She could feel the weight of expectation from her colleagues and the scrutiny of the clients. For a moment, fear threatened to overwhelm her. But then, in her mind's eye, she saw herself standing at the edge of that dream forest, poised on the brink of a great adventure. She took a deep breath and began to speak. To her surprise, the words flowed easily. She found herself not just reciting rehearsed lines, but speaking with genuine passion about the campaign she'd helped create. The clients leaned forward, engaged by her enthusiasm and the fresh perspective she brought to the table. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, to Sarah's amazement, the room erupted in applause. The lead client stood up, a broad smile on his face. "Ms. Walker, that was exceptional," he said, extending his hand. "If this is the kind of innovation and energy your firm brings to the table, we're excited to move forward with the campaign." As the room buzzed with excitement, Sarah caught Mr. Thompson's eye. He gave her a nod of approval, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. In that moment, Sarah felt a surge of confidence unlike anything she'd experienced before. She had faced her fear, taken a risk, and it had paid off. The dream guide was right. She had the power to shape her own destiny. As the day wound down and Sarah prepared to leave the office, Mr. Thompson called her into his office once more. "Sarah," he said, his usual gruff demeanor softened slightly, "I have to admit, you surprised me today. That was impressive work." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, trying to contain her smile. "I've been thinking," he continued. "We have a new project coming up, a major rebranding for a tech startup. It's high risk, high reward. Normally, I'd give it to one of the senior managers, but how would you like to take the lead?" Sarah's eyes widened. This was the kind of opportunity she'd dreamed of for years. In the past, she might have hesitated, doubted herself. But now she didn't even pause. "I'd love to," she said firmly. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't let you down." As Sarah left the office that evening, she felt as if she were walking on air. In the span of a single day, she had transformed her work life. But as she drove home, a nagging thought crept in. Her job wasn't the only area of her life that needed change. She thought of Tom, her boyfriend of 5 years. Their relationship had fallen into a comfortable but passionless routine. Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time they'd had a meaningful conversation or shared a genuine laugh. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah made another decision. It was time to wake up every aspect of her life. Tom was already home, slouched on the couch, his attention fixed on the TV. He barely glanced up as Sarah entered. "Hey," he mumbled. "There's leftover pizza if you're hungry." Sarah took a deep breath. "Tom, can we talk?" He looked up, a flicker of concern crossing his face at her serious tone. "Sure, what's up?" Sarah sat down beside him, turning off the TV. "Tom, are you happy? With us, I mean." Tom blinked, caught off guard by the direct question. I guess. We're fine, aren't we?" "Are we?" Sarah pressed. "When was the last time we did something exciting together? Or had a conversation that wasn't about work or what to have for dinner?" Tom's brow furrowed. "Where is this coming from, Sarah?" Sarah took his hand, surprising both of them with the gesture. "I had a kind of awakening today. I realized I've been sleepwalking through my life, accepting fine instead of pursuing extraordinary. And I don't want to do that anymore. Not with my career and not with our relationship." Tom was silent for a long moment, processing her words. Finally, he squeezed her hand. "You're right," he admitted softly. "We've both been coasting, haven't we? So, what do we do?" Sarah smiled, feeling a spark of the old connection they'd once shared. "Well, for starters, how about we plan an adventure? Something neither of us has ever done before." Tom's eyes lit up with a glimmer of excitement. "You know, I've always wanted to try rock climbing." As they spent the evening researching climbing gyms and planning a weekend trip to a nearby state park, Sarah felt the warmth of hope blooming in her chest. Change was possible not just in her professional life, but in her personal life as well. That night, as Sarah drifted off to sleep, she found herself once again at the edge of the dream forest. The dream guide stood waiting for her, a proud smile on his face. "Well done, Sarah," he said warmly. "You've taken the first steps on your journey. But remember, this is just the beginning." Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. "What comes next?" The dream guide gestured towards the forest, which seemed even more vast and mysterious than before. "That, my dear, is up to you. But remember this: life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Embrace the unknown, for that is where true growth lies." As the dream faded and Sarah drifted into a deep, restful sleep, she felt a sense of peace and purpose she hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah couldn't wait to see what it would bring. Chapter 3: Embracing Discomfort. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change for Sarah. At work, she threw herself into the new rebranding project with an enthusiasm that surprised even herself. She found herself working longer hours, not out of obligation, but because she was genuinely excited about the creative possibilities. Her new attitude didn't go unnoticed. Colleagues who had previously overlooked her now sought her input on projects. She even caught Mr. Thompson bragging about her to a client, referring to her as one of our rising stars. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Sarah quickly realized that growth often came hand in hand with discomfort. There were days when the responsibility of leading the project felt overwhelming, moments when she questioned her abilities and wondered if she'd bitten off more than she could chew. In those moments of doubt, Sarah would close her eyes and recall the dream guide's words, "Growth and comfort can never coexist." She began to see these challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities for growth. One particularly stressful afternoon, as Sarah grappled with a major setback in the project timeline, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. As she strolled through a nearby park, she found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed in such a short time. "I asked to wake up," she mused aloud, "but I didn't realize how exhausting being awake could be." Just then, a jogger passed by, his t-shirt bearing a quote that caught Sarah's eye. "Life begins at the end of your comfort zone." Sarah stopped in her tracks, struck by the synchronicity. She pulled out her phone and quickly jotted down the quote, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, this new path was challenging, but it was also infinitely more rewarding than the comfortable rut she'd been in before. Meanwhile, Sarah and Tom's relationship was undergoing its own transformation. True to their word, they had started pushing themselves to try new experiences together. The rock climbing trip had been a revelation, equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Sarah discovered a strength and agility she never knew she possessed, while Tom's natural caution complemented her newfound daring. Previous content remains the same. As they sat around a campfire that evening, muscles aching but spirits high, Tom turned to Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, poking at the fire with a stick, "I can't remember the last time I felt this alive." Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "It's like we've been living in black and white, and suddenly everything's in color." Tom reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a familiar yet long-forgotten tingle up her arm. "Thank you," he said softly, "for waking us both up." As they gazed into the dancing flames, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment. Yes, change was uncomfortable, even scary at times, but it was also thrilling, rejuvenating, and utterly worth it. Chapter 4: The Power of State. As the weeks passed, Sarah found herself facing a new challenge. While her initial burst of enthusiasm had carried her far, she noticed her energy starting to flag. The long hours at work and the constant push to try new things in her personal life were taking their toll. One morning, as she struggled to drag herself out of bed, Sarah found herself longing for her old, comfortable routine. The temptation to slip back into her former patterns was strong. But as she stood in front of the mirror, trying to summon the energy to face the day, Sarah remembered something else the dream guide had told her. Your mental and emotional state is the foundation of your success. She took a deep breath and decided to try an experiment. Instead of focusing on how tired she felt, Sarah closed her eyes and vividly recalled how she'd felt after nailing her first big presentation. She remembered the surge of confidence, the electric feeling of accomplishment. To her surprise, she felt her posture straighten and her energy lift. She opened her eyes and saw a familiar spark in her reflection. "Interesting," she murmured. "Maybe there's something to this state thing after all." From that day on, Sarah began to pay more attention to her mental and emotional state. She started each morning with a brief meditation, focusing on feelings of gratitude and excitement for the day ahead. She created a playlist of upbeat songs that never failed to boost her mood and played it during her commute. At work, she noticed how her state affected not just her own performance, but the entire team's energy. On days when she came in feeling confident and enthusiastic, ideas flowed more freely, and obstacles seemed less daunting. Sarah shared her discovery with Tom, and together they began to experiment with ways to consciously manage their states. They started a gratitude journal, writing down 3 things they were thankful for each night. They challenged each other to random acts of kindness, delighting in how helping others lifted their own spirits. One evening, as they were cooking dinner together, another new habit they'd picked up, Tom turned to Sarah with a mischievous grin. "You know what would really change our state?" he asked. "Dancing." Before Sarah could protest, Tom had pulled out his phone and started playing an upbeat salsa tune. He grabbed her hand and spun her around the kitchen. Sarah laughed, initially feeling awkward and self-conscious. But as she let herself get caught up in the music and Tom's infectious enthusiasm, she felt her mood soar. By the time the song ended, they were both breathless and giddy. "Now that," Tom said, planting a kiss on her flushed cheek, "is what I call a state change." From that night on, impromptu dance parties became a regular occurrence in their household. It became their go-to method for shaking off a bad day or celebrating a win. Chapter 5: The Plateau. As months passed, Sarah's transformation continued to unfold. Her confidence at work grew, and she found herself taking on increasingly challenging projects. Her relationship with Tom had been reinvigorated, filled with newfound intimacy and shared adventures. But as the initial excitement of change began to wear off, Sarah found herself facing a new challenge: the plateau. It started subtly. The thrill of trying new things began to diminish. The strategies that had initially boosted her mood and energy didn't seem to have the same impact. At work, while she was still performing well, she no longer felt the same sense of growth and progress. One night, as she tossed and turned, unable to sleep, Sarah found herself back in the dream forest. The dream guide was waiting for her, his expression knowing. "Ah, the plateau," he said, nodding sagely. "A familiar visitor on any journey of growth." Sarah sighed, relieved to have a name for what she was experiencing. "It feels like I've stalled," she admitted. "Like all the progress I've made is slipping away." The dream guide smiled gently. "The plateau is not your enemy, Sarah. It's a natural part of the journey. Think of it as a resting place, a chance to integrate all you've learned before you climb to the next peak." He gestured for her to follow him, and they began to walk through the forest. As they walked, the dream guide continued to speak. "Remember, progress is not always linear. Sometimes the most important growth happens in the quiet moments when you're not striving or pushing." They came to a clearing where a magnificent tree stood, its branches reaching towards the sky. The dream guide pointed to the tree. "Look closely," he instructed. Sarah peered at the tree, noticing for the first time that its growth rings were visible. Some rings were wide, indicating years of rapid growth. Others were narrow, representing slower years. "But notice," the dream guide said, "that even in the narrow rings, growth still occurred, and those slower years were just as crucial in creating the strength and beauty of this tree." Sarah nodded, beginning to understand. "So, what should I do during this plateau?" The dream guide smiled. "First, acknowledge it. Accept that it's a natural and necessary part of your journey. Then use this time to reflect on how far you've come. Integrate the lessons you've learned. And most importantly, be kind to yourself." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Remember, Sarah, the journey of growth is not about constant acceleration. It's about consistent progress over time. Trust the process." As the dream began to fade, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The plateau was not a setback, but an opportunity. An opportunity to catch her breath, to consolidate her gains, and to prepare for the next phase of her journey. When she woke the next morning, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She decided to use this plateau period to deepen her practices rather than constantly seeking new challenges. She began to journal regularly, reflecting on her journey and the lessons she'd learned. She revisited some of the personal development books that had inspired her early on, finding new insights now that she had more experience. At work, instead of pushing for the next big project, she focused on refining her skills and mentoring younger team members. She found a deep satisfaction in sharing her knowledge and seeing others grow. In her relationship with Tom, they used this calmer period to have deeper conversations about their future. They discussed their dreams, their fears, and how they could support each other's growth in the long term. As weeks passed, Sarah began to appreciate the plateau for what it was. Not a stopping point, but a launching pad for the next phase of her journey. Chapter 6: The Next Level. It was a crisp autumn morning when Sarah felt the stirring of change once again. As she sipped her morning coffee, gazing out at the trees adorned in vibrant reds and golds, she felt a familiar excitement bubbling up inside her. The plateau had served its purpose. She felt rested, integrated, and ready for a new challenge. But what form would that challenge take? As if in answer to her unspoken question, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Mr. Thompson, and the subject line made her heart skip a beat. Opportunity for advancement. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the email. Mr. Thompson was retiring, and the company was looking for a new creative director. Her name was on the short list of potential candidates. Sarah's first instinct was a mixture of excitement and terror. The role of creative director had been a distant dream, something she thought might be possible years down the line. Was she really ready for such a big leap? As doubt began to creep in, Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She recalled the dream guide's words, "The only limits that exist are the ones in your mind." She opened her eyes, a new determination settling over her. Yes, this was a big step. Yes, it would be challenging. But hadn't every step of this journey pushed her out of her comfort zone? And hadn't every challenge ultimately led to growth? Sarah spent the next few weeks preparing for the interview process. She reached out to mentors for advice, studied the company's long-term goals, and developed a vision for where she could take the creative department. The night before her final interview, Sarah found herself once again in the dream forest. But this time, instead of meeting the dream guide, she found herself standing alone at the base of a tall mountain. A note was pinned to a nearby tree. In familiar handwriting, it read, "Sarah, you've come so far, and I'm proud of you. But this next peak is yours to climb alone. Trust yourself. You have everything you need within you. Remember, it's not about reaching the top. It's about who you become on the journey. Believe in yourself as I believe in you." Your guide. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she read the note. She looked up at the mountain before her, feeling a mix of anticipation and nervousness. But underneath it all was a steady current of confidence. She had grown so much, learned so much. Whatever challenges this mountain held, she knew she was ready to face them. As the dream faded and Sarah drifted back to consciousness, she felt a profound sense of peace. Yes, tomorrow's interview was important, but it wasn't an end point. It was just another step on a lifelong journey of growth and self-discovery. She turned to look at Tom, still sleeping peacefully beside her. His support had been unwavering throughout her transformation. Whatever tomorrow brought, She knew they would face it together. Sarah closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. Tomorrow was full of possibilities, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly, fully ready to embrace them all. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, Sarah awoke, feeling refreshed and ready. She had no way of knowing exactly what the day would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. She was awake, truly awake, and ready to live life to its fullest. The end.